7 tiny puppies trembled on the roadside, huddling together as the truck's headlights sliced through the darkness. Peter slammed on the brakes. The vehicle skidded, tires screeched, and his heart clenched in his chest. Had he hit them? But as he stepped out of the cab, something far worse awaited him. Behind the puppies, lying motionless in the muddy ditch, was their mother. Someone had dumped them here, left them to die. But why? Peter had no idea that this night would lead him to dangerous people, a secret that should have stayed buried, and a choice that would change his life forever. But let's start from the beginning. The road stretched into infinity. The highway stretched into infinity, winding like a black ribbon through the hills. Its wet asphalt gleamed under the rare headlights, like a cold serpent shimmering in the dark. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, drumming against the truck's roof with sharp, rhythmic strikes. The air was thick with dampness, and the road slick, treacherous. Peter Houston, a seasoned trucker, tightened his grip on the wheel. One hand held a thermos of cooling coffee, the other steered the multi-ton beast barreling through the night. He yawned, feeling exhaustion settle over him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Just a little further. A gas station. Hot coffee. 10 minutes of rest. His thoughts drifted, slow and drowsy, but then something jolted him awake. The headlights caught an unusual movement in the darkness. What was that? Peter blinked, straining to see through the rain. The downpour blurred everything, but there they were, tiny shapes, barely visible in the water's relentless cascade. 7 little bundles trembled by the roadside. Peter's heart clenched. He knew instantly they were puppies. Tiny, soaked, terrified, huddled together, pressing against each other for warmth. Their thin paws slipped on the wet pavement, their little tails quivering from cold and fear. They were scared. They had no idea where they were. And then, in that moment, one of them, the smallest, darted forward, straight onto the road, straight under his wheels. Peter didn't think. He just hit the brakes. The truck skidded. The cabin tilted dangerously, and for a split second, it felt like the entire rig would flip into the ditch. The seatbelt dug into his chest. The tires screeched like a wounded animal. And then, silence. The truck had stopped. The rain still pounded on the roof, but everything else was frozen in time. Did I hit them? Peter exhaled sharply, his heart hammering like a wild drum. He fumbled with the seatbelt, flung the door open, and leapt into a puddle, not even noticing the icy water soaking into his jeans. Soaking wet, shivering, he stepped forward, eyes scanning the darkness. The puppies were still there. They hadn't moved. They just sat there, pressed together in a tight, trembling cluster. Their big, frightened eyes stared straight at him. They were alive. But their mother... Peter saw her immediately. She lay in the ditch, just off the road. A large dog. Her fur was drenched, her outstretched paw frozen in an unnatural, painful position. One of the puppies nestled against her, burying its tiny face in her fur. But she wasn't breathing. She had died protecting them. Peter felt something snap inside him. Anger, grief, disbelief, sorrow, all of it twisted into a single, burning knot in his chest. Someone had dumped them here, like trash. Left them to die. Who could do something like this? He wanted to scream, but his throat was tight, the words trapped. The puppies began to whimper, softly, pitifully, as if they couldn't understand why their mother wouldn't move. Peter crouched down, reaching out a hand. Normally, dogs were wary of strangers. They should have flinched, backed away. But they didn't move. One of the puppies hesitantly nuzzled his palm. Another trembled but didn't turn away. They trusted him. Without even thinking, Peter carefully wrapped them in his old work blanket. Their tiny bodies weighed almost nothing in his strong arms, but their warmth, their uneven, shaky breaths, it burned through him. "All right, little ones, you're coming with me." He had no idea that this night would change his life forever. The road was empty. After the shock of what had happened on the highway, Peter felt nothing but exhaustion. The adrenaline was slowly draining from his body, replaced by a dull ache in his shoulders and back. He wasn't even fully aware of what he was doing, just driving forward, listening to the tiny sounds coming from the passenger seat. The puppies. They breathed softly, shivering, pressing into one another. They didn't yet realize that their lives had just changed, just like his own. The rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to the windshield, reflecting the dim glow of scattered streetlights. The shelter was 30 miles from where he had found them, a small building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a tall fence, the kind of place run by people who actually cared. When Peter pulled into the lot and shut off the engine, he hesitated for a moment. Maybe he should just leave them by the door, drive away, pretend he had never found them. Then a soft whimper broke the silence. Peter exhaled. No, it was too late for that. He carefully lifted the bundle of puppies into his arms and pushed open the heavy door. Uncovering the truth. As soon as he stepped inside, he was met by Sarah, the shelter's veterinarian. "Peter?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see him standing in the hallway, drenched and grim-faced, cradling something in his arms. "You've never brought us an animal before." Peter didn't answer. He just gave a small nod and looked down at the trembling bundle in his hands. "These little ones were sitting by the highway," he said quietly. "Their mother didn't make it." Sarah walked over slowly. When she unwrapped the blanket, her expression immediately changed. "Wait." She frowned, inspecting the puppies more closely. She gently examined their paws, checked their ears, peeked inside their tiny mouths. Peter noticed her brows knit together in concentration. "Something wrong?" he asked. She looked up at him. "These aren't just stray mutts." Peter frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah exhaled, then met his gaze. "They're Dobermans, Peter. Expensive. Elite." He blinked. "You're serious?" She nodded. "These puppies, they don't just get abandoned. They're worth too much." Peter looked at the tiny creatures again. They seemed so fragile, so helpless. He never would have guessed that these little things could be worth thousands of dollars on the black market. So why were they thrown away? His jaw tightened. "You think someone just got rid of them?" Sarah shook her head. "I think..." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to say it out loud. "I think they might be part of something illegal." Peter's frown deepened. "You mean..." She nodded. "An illegal breeding operation, puppy mills, places where dogs are bred in horrible conditions without paperwork or care. The people who run them don't see dogs as living beings, just products." Anger flared in Peter's chest. "And they just dumped them?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe their mother escaped. Or maybe these puppies were defective, sick, not up to standard. In that case..." She trailed off, but Peter already understood. If he hadn't found them tonight, they wouldn't have survived. Unexpected visitors. Before Peter could respond, a sudden knock echoed through the shelter. Loud, firm. Peter and Sarah exchanged glances. She frowned, glancing at the clock. "Midnight." Something about that knock made Peter's instincts go on high alert. A bad feeling. He slowly straightened, his fingers curling into fists. The door swung open. 2 men stood in the doorway. Suits, slicked back hair, empty, calculating stares. "Good evening," one of them said. His voice was polite but ice cold. "We're looking for some missing puppies." Peter immediately knew. These weren't concerned owners. These were the kind of men who didn't ask, "Did you find them?" These were the kind of men who came to take them back. The puppies, their merchandise. Peter's heart pounded. Rage boiled inside him. He wasn't going to give them up. Not now. Not ever. The air in the room had turned dense, like a heavy fog before a storm. Peter felt the tension building inside him, a tightness in his chest, a warning of imminent danger. Two men stood in the doorway. Their perfectly pressed suits didn't belong in a modest animal shelter. Their faces were smooth, emotionless. But their eyes clung to everything, scanning, calculating, searching. Peter exhaled slowly, forcing down the anger rising in his gut. He knew who they were. Not pet owners, not people who worried about lost animals, not the kind to scoop up puppies and sigh with relief. These were traffickers, and their presence here meant only one thing. They knew the puppies were here. The game begins. "Puppies?" Peter repeated, feigning confusion. One of the men smirked slightly, pulling something from his pocket. Photographs. The same puppies. 7 tiny, frightened bundles, huddled together. Peter felt Sarah tense beside him. "They were stolen," the second man said calmly. "We need to take them back." Stolen? Peter clenched his jaw. He knew that was a lie. These men hadn't asked, "Are they safe? Are they alive?" They hadn't said, "We've been searching for them. We were so worried." They had simply declared, "They are our property." Bullshit. Peter had seen men like them before. He had seen how they sold puppies by the roadside, shoving them into filthy cages. He had seen them drag sick, starving dogs from vans like they were worthless garbage. No. Not this time. He slowly rose to his feet. "Sorry," he said, his voice smooth, almost lazy. "I haven't seen any puppies." The men exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward, tilting his head slightly. "You're sure?" His voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable hint of threat beneath it. Peter met his gaze without flinching. "Completely." Silence stretched between them. A flicker of doubt crossed the first man's face, but then he shrugged and reached into his inner pocket. "If you hear anything," he extended a business card, "give us a call." The card was plain, black and white, no logos, just a name and a number. Peter didn't take it. The man smirked slightly and placed it on the counter instead. "We'll be waiting." Then they turned and walked out, leaving behind only the lingering chill of their presence. The door closed. They were gone. But this wasn't over. A decision made. Peter stood still, listening to the silence. A moment later, Sarah let out a shaky breath and gripped the edge of the table as if to steady herself. This is bad," she whispered. "Really bad." Peter turned to her. "You know them?" She shook her head anxiously. "No, but I know what this means. They know about the puppies, and they didn't just come here by chance." She swallowed hard. "If they didn't get them today, they'll come back tomorrow, with the police, or with someone worse." The puppies. Peter glanced toward the corner. They were still curled up in a trembling little heap, their big brown eyes watching him with absolute trust. He clenched his fists. No. He wasn't going to let them go. "We need to hide them," Sarah whispered. Peter nodded. "And we need to do it fast." Their survival depended on how quickly they could disappear. They moved fast. As soon as the two strangers left the shelter, Sarah immediately contacted volunteers and the local police. Peter, despite his initial reluctance, gave a statement as well. He wasn't sure what difference it would make, but he knew that staying silent could cost the puppies their lives. And then everything snowballed. The story spread through the county faster than anyone expected. Volunteers raised the alarm on social media, shares multiplied, and within days, photos of the rescued puppies flooded news feeds. Elite breed puppies abandoned on the highway. Who are their owners? Is there an illegal breeding ring in town? Who will answer for the cruelty? Mysterious strangers tried to take the puppies? What's really going on? Each new post drew more attention. People from all over the area reached out to the shelter, offering to help. Some donated food, others offered to adopt the puppies. And then came the real news. The police found a connection. It turned out there was an illegal breeding operation in the area, one that raised dogs in horrifying conditions and sold them on the black market. The puppies had been deemed defective. Their mother had escaped with them. They were no longer useful, so someone had decided to get rid of the problem. When Peter heard that, his fists clenched on their own. He couldn't understand how people could be so heartless. But now, at least, the puppies had a chance. The next 2 weeks were some of the busiest of Peter's life. He hadn't planned to get involved any more than necessary. He thought he'd drop the puppies off at the shelter, let the right people take care of them, and move on. But that wasn't how things turned out. He found himself stopping by the shelter often, bringing food, helping out. Sarah, exhausted but happy, told him how people from all over had responded, how they were carefully screening adopters to make sure the puppies would go to real families, not another heartless breeder. And one by one, 6 of the 7 found homes. But one stayed. The last one. He was the smallest, the weakest of the litter. He was the one who had run onto the road first, the one their mother had tried to shield with her own body. He wasn't as playful as the others. While his siblings yipped and tumbled over each other, this one simply sat and watched, waiting. Peter stopped by the shelter on the day the 6th puppy left. Sarah met him at the entrance, cradling the last one in her arms. The little pup pressed against her chest, his big brown eyes locking onto Peter's the moment he stepped closer. "He still hasn't found a home," Sarah said softly. Peter leaned in. The puppy let out a tiny whimper and nudged his nose against Peter's hand. Sarah hesitated, then held him out. "Maybe you should take him." Peter took the pup. Warm, small, tiny paws curled against his shirt, clinging gently. The puppy took a deep breath, then let it out in a soft sigh, like he had finally ended up where he was meant to be. Peter smirked. "I think he already picked me first." The little one yawned and snuggled in closer. Peter didn't fight it. He just knew. This one was staying with him.